Good evening, my friends. Do settle in for a moment. I find myself sitting here as one does after a long life, with much to tell about a book that altered the landscape for 30 million souls, and a principle that sits beneath it all like a quiet current beneath a river. The book is called The Secret. Curious thing. How secrets tend to carry weight, do they not? Before we venture deeper, I ought to tell you how this manuscript came into being. There was an Australian woman, Rhonda Byrne by name, who found herself at a crossroads. Her father had passed, her livelihood had crumbled, her heart had grown heavy from disappointment. In such darkness, her daughter offered her an old book, published back in 1910, a work about science and accumulation. When she read it, something stirred. She recognized a pattern. Over months, she began to investigate. She studied the ancients, the philosophers, the minds that shaped civilization. And what she discovered was this: certain people have long held a knowing, not taught in schools, not broadcast to the masses, but whispered through the centuries from one awakened consciousness to another. This knowing, she resolved, ought no longer remain hidden. Within a year of publication, nearly 8 million copies had found their way into American hands, translated into 50 languages, 30 million copies across the globe. One might say the world was ready to listen. At the heart of this entire matter rests a principle the author called the law of attraction, simple in its utterance, profound in its implications. The law suggests that like draws to like, that what you hold in your mind, you draw toward yourself. That which occupies your thoughts with persistent intensity becomes the very thing that manifests in your experience. Let me be plain about this. You broadcast, whether you realize it or not, constantly broadcasting like a transmitter in your own consciousness. The universe, vast as it is, operates as a receiver and reflector. You emit a frequency, and it answers in kind. Consider for a moment how this works in the ordinary course of living. A man thinks himself poor, repeats it to himself, feels the weight of it in his chest. Poverty attracts poverty. The universe does not judge. It simply responds to what you persistently transmit. This is neither punishment nor reward. It is law, as natural as gravity, as indifferent as mathematics. The Secret suggests that these great minds understood this. Newton, with his laws of motion, grasped something about order in the cosmos. Einstein recognized that matter and energy dance together, that thought itself is energy. Beethoven, deaf and isolated, continued to create beauty because his inner vision, his feeling state, became his strongest instrument. These were not men who learned this in academies. They felt it. They lived it. And here lies something many overlook. The law of attraction does not discriminate. It cares nothing for your moral character. A generous soul and a selfish one both activate it equally. Whatever occupies your focused attention, whatever commands your emotion over time, becomes the magnet by which similar circumstances are drawn to you. Most people, you see, have been taught from childhood to be practical, to doubt, to think that merely thinking something does not birth it into the world. Yet consider the price of this skepticism. Generations go through life broadcasting unwittingly, thinking themselves insufficient, aging unworthy of love. These thoughts carry feeling with them, and it is the feeling that truly powers the transmission. This brings us to a subtlety that the author emphasizes with great intensity. The law of attraction, she insists, makes no distinction between positive and negative thoughts. It simply delivers whatever you most persistently think and most deeply feel. If your attention runs to what you do not have, you transmit scarcity. The universe mirrors this back. More scarcity arrives, not because you are cursed, but because you have sent a very clear signal about what you expect to receive. Now, here is something worth holding on to. When you understand this fully, it changes everything. Your life right now, whatever its state, is the result of the thinking you have done previously. This is not an easy truth to swallow, for it means you have participated in your own circumstances. Yet, turn it around, and it becomes liberating. If you created your current life through your thoughts, you are equally capable of creating a different life through different thoughts. The author put it thus: you are the architect of your own destiny. You are the author. You write your own story. Most people, however, remain unaware of this capacity. From earliest childhood, they are conditioned toward doubt. They internalize the belief that life happens to them rather than through them. They look outside themselves for salvation, for permission, for proof. The world is rigged, they think. I am not enough, they believe. What the secret reveals is that this conditioning, while understandable, is profoundly limiting. The universe operates on a frequency system. Your thoughts emit, your feelings amplify, your expectations shape what manifests. There is in the author's work a statement of particular power. Your current life circumstances are the result of your habitual thinking. This is simultaneously the harshest thing you can hear and the most liberating. Let us move, then, to something most people miss. They learn the principle and think it enough to simply think positively. But the work goes deeper. It involves your feeling state, your emotional conviction, your sense of already possessing what you desire. Think of it in practical terms. You might repeat to yourself that you are successful, that money flows freely to you, that love surrounds you. But if, underneath these words, you feel doubt, fear, or unworthiness, you are sending mixed signals. A contradiction. The universe receives both transmissions and acts according to the deeper one, which is always the feeling. The law of attraction does not process your words. It processes your state. And your state is determined less by what you tell yourself and more by what you genuinely believe about yourself and your capacity to receive. There exists a remarkable practice within the secret framework called the process of ask, believe, and receive. First, ask. This is not casual wishing. It is clarity of intention. When you ask, you must be precise, not vague longings like, I want to be better or happier. Rather, I want my work to be meaningful and my income to be sufficient. I want a relationship of mutual respect and genuine affection. I want to feel steady in my body and calm in my mind. Specificity matters because it sends a clear signal. The universe, metaphorically speaking, is a vast fulfillment mechanism. If you are unclear about your order, you will receive a confused result. Second, believe. And here is where most people falter. Belief does not mean naive optimism. It means knowing that your request has been received. It means trusting in the process even before you see evidence. Think of ordering in a restaurant. You place your order. You do not return to the kitchen every few minutes asking whether the meal is being prepared. You sit. You wait with reasonable confidence. The meal is coming. Or consider a ship you have booked passage upon many months in advance. You do not walk the dock daily, asking whether it will truly arrive. You possess an internal knowing. The vessel will appear on its appointed day. This is the feeling of true belief, not blind hope, but steady knowing. If you spend your days thinking, "Why has this not arrived? Why am I still waiting? When will my life change?" you are not actually believing. You are transmitting doubt and impatience. The universe responds to these frequencies and delivers more of the same. More waiting, more doubt, more postponement. Belief requires that you interrupt this circular pattern. When doubt arises, and it will arise, you might say to yourself, "I have asked clearly. The universe has received my request. It is in motion. I trust this process." Do not demand a timeline. Do not insist on proof. The belief itself is the proof you are aligned with receiving. Third, receive. And this is perhaps the most misunderstood element. To receive is not to passively wait. To receive is to feel as though you have already been given what you asked for. Here is where the author departs dramatically from conventional thinking. She suggests that you must experience in your body and heart the feeling of already possessing your desire. If you want a home of a certain quality, you must feel what it feels like to live there. The texture of the floors, the light through certain windows, the safety and peace of being in that space. If you desire a partnership of depth, you must feel the companionship, the comfort, the ease of being understood by another person. Not in your imagination as fantasy, but as though you are rehearsing what is already true. This is an act of inner permission. It says to yourself and to the universe, "I am ready. I am open. I am already practicing being the person who has received this." And in that state of readiness, the universe responds more readily. It meets you in that frequency. Now I must address something the author dwells upon at length, and it is worth your full attention. This is the matter of gratitude. Gratitude is not mere politeness. It is not something you perform after you have received good fortune. Rather, it is a fundamental shift in your electromagnetic output. When you wake each morning in a state of true appreciation for what already exists, you are sending a very specific signal. You are saying, "I recognize abundance. I see what is already here. I am open to more of this quality entering my life." The author suggests that gratitude is among the most powerful tools for accelerating what you desire. Not because the universe rewards virtue, but because gratitude shifts your entire point of focus. Instead of scanning the world for what is missing or wrong, you begin to register what is present and functioning and worthy of recognition. Think about how a person typically moves through their day. Their attention runs toward problems, the bills that have arrived, the way their body aches, the relationships that have disappointed, the opportunities that have not yet materialized. All of this is technically true, but it is not the complete truth, and yet it becomes the defining truth because it commands all of your attention. Gratitude breaks this spell. It says, "Yes, I see difficulty, but I also see that I have shelter, food, people who know my name, a body that continues to function, a mind that continues to work. I see small kindnesses and small survivals. And in acknowledging these, I am broadcasting a different frequency. I am saying, enough is present here. I am not in absolute destitution. There is something to build upon." When you begin the day with genuine gratitude rather than with anxiety, you have set your internal dial to an entirely different station. Your nervous system calibrates differently. Your attention naturally begins to favor what is working rather than what is broken. And the universe, so to speak, receives a signal that you are someone who notices abundance, which means the universe is inclined to send you more of what will catch the attention of a grateful mind. The secret puts this directly. The more grateful you are, the more you attract to be grateful for. There is a corollary to this, one that requires careful handling. The author suggests that withholding or resisting payment, that dwelling on what you owe and what you fear paying, actually magnifies the experience of debt and scarcity. She proposes instead that when you must pay an obligation, you might recognize that the payment itself is an outflow of abundance. Now, this requires interpretation. It does not mean you should throw money about recklessly or ignore legitimate warnings about financial caution. Rather, it means that the fear and resentment with which you pay can actually deepen your belief in insufficiency. Consider instead a frame shift. When you pay, you might see it as evidence that you have the resources to pay, that your life has flow, that money has moved through your hands. This is actually a signal of having had enough, not having lacked. And here is something deeper. The author asserts that giving, when done from a place of genuine abundance, rather than obligatory sacrifice, actually accelerates your sense of plenty. When you give freely, you are transmitting the message that you possess more than you need. The universe receives this message. The frequency shift from scarcity to sufficiency is so central to what the secret teaches that it deserves its own careful attention. Most people, through no fault of their own, have been marinated in scarcity consciousness. There is not enough. Good things are rare. You must grasp and hoard and protect what little you have. There will not be enough for you. This messaging runs so deep that most never recognize they are living inside it. The author proposes a different possibility. What if you began to consciously rehearse sufficiency? What if you allowed yourself to imagine, and more importantly, to feel what it would be like to have what you need? To have a bit extra? To feel easy about paying what you owe? To imagine helping others? To feel generous? These feelings are not fantasies. They are, in the author's framework, practices in transmitting a different frequency. You are quite literally retraining your nervous system to recognize and expect adequacy, rather than perpetual hunger. One practice she mentions involves something called a blank check from the universe. You would write your name on it, a specific amount, and then you would hold this image and feel the gratitude and relief that would accompany actually receiving such a sum. This is not childish magical thinking. Not exactly. It is the author's way of saying that your feeling state about money must shift before your circumstances around money can shift. And now we arrive at something quite subtle, and it is the reason I have guided you through all of this before arriving here. The author recognizes that visualization, this practice of imagining your desired reality as though it is already true, is far more powerful than simple positive thinking. But visualization, properly practiced according to the secret, is not a single frame photograph held in your mind. It is a living, moving picture, a film, if you will. The author emphasizes that your imaginative rehearsal should be dynamic. You should see yourself moving through the experience. If you desire a particular kind of work, do not simply picture yourself sitting at a desk. Instead, imagine yourself walking into the building with ease. Imagine the conversation with colleagues. Imagine the problem you solve with your particular insight. Imagine the end-of-day satisfaction, that comes from having contributed. Do not remain outside the picture, looking in. Step inside it. Move through it. Live it in imagination. This matters profoundly because when your visualization remains static, your mind treats it as something unusual, something other. It remains fantasy. But when your visualization includes movement, sequence, sensory detail, your nervous system begins to treat it as memory rather than fantasy. And the distinction is crucial. Moreover, the author suggests that you need not worry yourself with how your desire will manifest. Ask clearly, believe steadily, receive fully. But do not burden yourself with figuring out the mechanism. That way lies obstruction. You interrupt your own transmission when you insist on understanding the route by which your desire will arrive. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive teaching in The Secret, and yet it is repeated with consistency. The author notes that people often surrender their wishes precisely because they cannot see the pathway to fulfillment. But this is a confusion. The pathway is not your concern. Your concern is clarity about what you want and an emotional alignment with already having received it. When you release your grip on needing to understand how, you relax. And in this relaxation, you transmit a frequency of trust rather than a frequency of anxious control. There is something else worth noting as you sit with all of this. The author discusses what happens when your attention turns toward the negative events of the world. When you read distressing news constantly and permit it to dominate your emotional landscape, you are feeding those images with your attention, your emotion, your energy. This does not mean you should be ignorant of world events, nor does it mean that your personal transformation has some moral obligation to solve global ills. Rather, it is a recognition that if all of your focus runs toward problems and suffering, your nervous system becomes entrained to that frequency. You cannot transmit the signal of peace and possibility if you are living inside a mental landscape of crisis. The author uses a striking formulation. Instead of focusing on war, focus on peace, not as denial of conflict, but as an active choosing of what you wish to see more of in the world. This inverts much of what you have been taught. You have been encouraged to fight against things, to resist them, to organize opposition. And yet the author suggests that this resistance itself becomes another form of amplification. Fighting war, you remain focused on war. What if instead you used your considerable capacities to focus on, to support, to amplify the conditions of peace? What if instead of fighting poverty, you focused on prosperity? Not denial, redirection. Now I recognize this is provocative, and I must be honest about a limitation inherent in this teaching. If every circumstance is entirely the product of your thought, then it becomes easy to blame those who suffer for their suffering. The logical extension of The Secret, taken too far, becomes a kind of spiritual cruelty. It absolves the privileged of their responsibility and burdens the struggling with shame on top of their struggle. The more balanced reading, I would suggest, is this. You cannot control whether drought comes or whether an economy contracts, but you can control your attention in response to these external facts. You can choose whether to maintain your dignity, your problem-solving capacity, your hope. You cannot think yourself out of every difficulty, but you can think yourself into or out of despair. And despair, when it becomes chronic, does make everything harder. There are people in the most difficult circumstances who maintain a remarkable inner equilibrium, and there are people with every advantage who have surrendered themselves to a kind of inner dissolution. The difference is not solely circumstance, it is partly the nature of their internal broadcast. The secret asks you to examine your own. What frequency are you emitting? Toward what outcome are you pointed? Let us speak then about responsibility. This is where the secret becomes most uncomfortable, most potentially dangerous, and yet most necessary. The author's fundamental assertion is this: you are not the victim of your life. You are the author of it. Your circumstances are not something that happened to you. They are something you have created through your consistent thoughts, beliefs, and expectations. For most people, this landing is initially resisted. It feels accusatory. It feels like adding insult to injury. You have struggled and suffered, and now you are told it is your own fault, that you thought yourself into your difficulties? But let me offer a different angle, one that the author herself emphasizes. If your life circumstances are indeed your creation, then they are equally subject to your revision. If you authored this chapter, you can author the next. The very condition that makes you responsible is the same condition that makes you powerful. Many people, however, remain trapped in a victim narrative, not because their victimization is false, but because they have not recognized that they have agency in response to it. They have been wronged, yes. They have been limited by circumstance or upbringing or discrimination or chance, yes. And yet, within the narrower sphere of their own consciousness, they retain a freedom that many are too resigned to claim. The author is firm on this point. You cannot change what you do not acknowledge responsibility for. So long as you believe that your life is something that is being done to you, you remain passive in relation to it. The moment you accept that your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs have shaped your trajectory, you gain the capacity to reshape it. This is not victim blaming repackaged as spirituality, not at its best. Rather, it is an invitation to step from a position of powerlessness into one of agency, a subtle but profound distinction. There are those I recognize who will have experienced genuine trauma, genuine injustice, genuine circumstances that overwhelmed their capacity to respond with the kind of mental clarity the author advocates. I do not dismiss this. And yet, even within such circumstances, there is usually some small corner of one's mind that remains one's own. Some small capacity to choose one's response, to maintain one's dignity, to harbor one small spark that the external circumstance cannot entirely extinguish. The author suggests that this corner, however small, is where transformation begins. The work, then, is to expand that corner, to extend the reach of conscious choice, to gradually inhabit more and more of your own decision-making, rather than operating on autopilot and habit. Practically speaking, this means becoming aware of your own habitual thoughts. Most people move through their days largely unconscious of the internal monologue that runs continuously beneath their surface awareness. You are therefore not even aware of what frequency you are broadcasting. The first step, then, is an act of noticing. What thoughts recur most often? What beliefs do you hold about your own capacity? What assumptions do you make about what is possible for someone like you? Often these thoughts are so familiar, so worn into the grooves of your being, that they are essentially invisible. You do not notice them because they feel like reality itself rather than like thoughts. But they are thoughts, and thoughts can be examined, questioned, changed. The author provides a practice for this. When you notice a thought arising, pause and ask yourself, is this true? Is this actually accurate? Or is this a habit? Is this something I have accepted without examining it, because I learned it very young, or because I have lived with it for so long? Many of your most limiting thoughts will not survive close examination. They are beliefs, not facts. They are transmitted information from family systems, cultures, traumatized previous generations, not expressions of absolute truth. Once you notice this distinction, you gain a small measure of freedom. If it is a belief, then it is something you might question, something you might set down, something you might replace. This is where the practice of affirmation comes in, though the author uses it somewhat differently than it is commonly understood. An affirmation is not simply a positive statement you repeat in hopes of convincing yourself. Rather, it is a deliberate shifting of your default setting. If your default thought is, I am not capable, and you begin to deliberately practice, I am learning to be more capable, you are not denying reality or pretending incompetence does not exist. You are rather recognizing that your default thought is neither inevitable nor eternal. It can shift. It will feel false at first. This is important to know. You will feel like you are lying to yourself. That is because you are introducing a new frequency into a system that had been tuned to an older one for a very long time. But here is what happens if you persist. The nervous system begins to habituate. The new thought becomes less shocking, then less foreign, then less false. Then, at last, merely another option available to your consciousness. There is a time frame for this, and it is far longer than most people wish. You cannot expect to shift a thought you have held for decades in the span of a few weeks, and the author would have you understand this not as failure, but as realistic expectation. Every moment you practice a new thought, you are overriding a long-established neural pathway. This takes time. It takes patience. It takes repetition. Now, this leads to something many miss about the secret. The author is not suggesting that you can think yourself into fortune without engaging the world. She is saying that the thought precedes the action, and the quality of the thought determines the quality of the action. A person who thinks I am incapable is unlikely to attempt anything difficult. A person who thinks I am learning is far more likely to try. A person who thinks the world is dangerous is likely to remain small. A person who thinks there are opportunities is more likely to notice them when they appear. So the thought is not magic. The thought is the permission. It is the opening. It is the stance from which you approach your life. And that stance determines, to a remarkable degree, what you are capable of perceiving and therefore capable of becoming. This is why the author emphasizes so fiercely the quality of your internal dialogue. It is not a luxury. It is not something you attend to once you have solved all your external problems. It is, in fact, the soil from which your capacity to solve external problems emerges. Most people have this precisely backwards. They believe that once their circumstances improve, they will feel better. Once they have success, they will feel confident. Once they have money, they will feel secure. Once they have a partner, they will feel loved. The author proposes the reverse sequence. Feel it first. Develop the internal state first. Then the external circumstances have a far greater likelihood of following. I must tell you something else, something that sits at the absolute center of this teaching, and yet is rarely examined closely. The secret, in its deepest form, is not actually about getting what you want. It is about becoming someone who naturally lives in alignment with what you most fundamentally desire. When you understand this, everything changes. You stop trying to manipulate circumstances. You stop trying to force the universe to comply. You begin instead to align yourself with the actual laws by which the universe operates. It is subtle work. It asks far more of you than simply thinking better thoughts. It asks you to examine the very foundation of who you believe yourself to be. It asks you to consider whether you might be capable of something more than you have previously assumed. It asks you to take responsibility not only for your failures, but for your potential. Most people, I would venture, have not truly considered their potential. They have been taught to be realistic, to keep their expectations manageable, to not get their hopes up. And this is a kind mercy in one sense, because if hope is dashed, one suffers less. But it is also a profound tragedy, because the life you do not allow yourself to imagine is a life you will never live. The secret is an invitation to a different experiment. What if you were willing to get your hopes up? What if you were willing to believe, even a little, that something more might be possible? What if you were willing to take responsibility for aligning yourself with that possibility? This is not naive. The world is real. Obstacles exist. You will face difficulty. Some doors will remain closed no matter how much you believe they should open. And yet, most people live as though far more doors are closed than actually are. They close them themselves through their assumptions, their beliefs, their habitual patterns. And they do this so early and so thoroughly that they never even notice the door was open. The author's great service, in my view, is that she has gathered evidence from a long lineage of human achievement to suggest that the door is often open, that the obstacle is often internal, that the primary impediment to your own becoming is frequently your own disbelief in that possibility. As I sit here on this side of a long life, I can tell you that I have watched some people flourish despite every disadvantage. I have watched others struggle despite every advantage. The difference was rarely circumstance alone. It was partly an internal conviction about what was possible and an internal permission to pursue it. The secret names this. It gives it shape. It offers a framework by which you might begin to work with your own mind rather than against it. That, to my mind, is the real work. Not controlling the universe, but aligning yourself with how it actually works. And yet, there is one final thing worth saying. This teaching is not without danger. It can become a way to blame those who suffer for their suffering. It can become a way to avoid facing genuine injustice or real limitation. It can become spiritual bypass, a way of not feeling what genuinely hurts. I would have you read The Secret as an invitation to examine your own mind, not as an absolute truth that explains all circumstances. Your thoughts matter. Your beliefs matter. Your internal frequency matters. And there are also real systems, real power structures, real constraints that exist independent of your thought. The wisdom is in holding both. Your thoughts shape your life far more than most people recognize. And your life is also shaped by circumstances you did not choose and cannot entirely control. You have responsibility for the former and a kind of wise acceptance regarding the latter. The art is in knowing which is which. As I close this particular meditation, I return to where we began. A book, a principle, a woman who decided to share something that had been guarded for centuries. The book is called The Secret. The principle is the law of attraction, and the invitation is to become conscious of the broadcast you are sending, to align that broadcast with what you genuinely desire, and to notice how the universe responds when you do. May you find the courage to consider what this might mean for you. May you find the clarity to know what you actually want. May you find the steadiness to believe it is possible. And may you find the wisdom to understand not only your responsibility, but also your capacity to author a life worth living. Alas, much could be said. This is but the beginning of understanding. Many more chapters remain, many more depths to explore. For now, let this suffice. Let your mind settle on what has been offered. Tomorrow, if you wish it, we might venture deeper still. Good night, my friend.